Hello, guys. Thank you very much for joining us today on this lovely, I think it's like Tuesday afternoon or something. Yeah, it is. Excellent. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about autism, the carnivore diet, and some other useful little hacks someone might implement to help improve their symptoms. I'm joined today with Dr. Abs, who's going to be answering all my dying questions about carnivore, perhaps get into biochemistry a little bit, and just any other information that you guys might find useful in this sort of space on the internet. Anyway, how's it going, Dr. Abs? Who are you? What do you do? And what do you want?
Give me all your money. So thank you very much for having me, Jonathan. So yeah, I'm carnivore as well, like self. So my background is initially started off in dentistry. I then moved on, I retrained and did a lot of other things. I do a lot of cosmetic medicine and a lot of longevity medicine. Now they are basically the same. In fact, they are literally the same thing. But if I say that, it's very confusing. So I say both separately, so it makes sense. But I'm also a consultant in biotechnology research, specializing in bioenergetics and proteomics. So how we make energy and how we make protein, essentially. And I've worked with a lot of people around the world, especially looking at certain supplements and the way they can affect our metabolism and things like that. So I think a nice coming together of two worlds to have an interesting discussion.
Yeah, for sure. That's interesting too. I'd get asked a lot about what you do. You know, he just said there. So there we go. That's who he is. That's what his background is. So there we have it. So yeah, my kind of first thing is obviously pointing out, you know, a ketogenic style diet can be effective for autism, you know, for different reasons. The blood sugar side of it, brain chemistry, the energy, intestinal permeability, preventing or reducing that. What else is there out there right now? And I know we could look at different amino acids in isolation, for example. What sort of are those, and what should people be looking at as like the first thing? They're on the carnivore diet. They want some more improvement in their symptoms. What do they look at first?
So first you need to look at how long you've been on the carnivore diet, because I think being on the carnivore diet by itself actually is not a huge amount of information. Yes, you're on this way of eating, which I think we would both agree is the best way of eating. But you also have to look at the context of that. So when you started the carnivore diet, what was your situation then? I.e., what's your medical history? What medical conditions did you have at the time? Mental health issues, et cetera, et cetera. We look at all these things. And then we look at the carnivore diet. Yes, that's great. But do we need to add certain things in there to help you individually based on your individual medical history as well? So that's the first place to look. Now, if someone is coming in from a place where they do have medical conditions, the transition into carnivore has to be specific to that. And if they've already transitioned, gut bacteria is fine, they can take, steak all day, as I'm sure we both could. Great. Then we have to look at what is the level of symptom or symptoms that they have. And everything is then based specifically to that, as I'm sure you can probably imagine. So it would be based on the clinical presentation, and then we go from there. And not just the clinical presentation, actually, their lifestyle. So what are they doing in terms of, for example, and there's a lot to it, but I'll give you a couple examples. Are they getting sunshine on their skin? Are they exercising in a way that's appropriate for them as an individual, et cetera, et cetera? And then we want all of that to build a nice picture. And then we go forward based on that picture, looking at this supplement or that supplement if we need it for a particular time period.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah. I've been looking at different pieces of data myself, and of course, when we're looking at autism, it's a newer disorder, a newer disease, if it were, as in people being diagnosed with it more. So when I was a child, when you're a child, it wasn't too much of a thing. I mean, you might get one or two children in the year group, maybe a few more, but now it's a couple of children in every classroom. I know the research I was sort of pulling apart was efficacious doses of different amino acid supplements or vitamins or even minerals to give a certain effect. Now, a lot of these are based on milligrams per kilogram of body weight, for example. Do you think you can extrapolate from those sort of examples of studies to say, okay, if a person supplemented with say, a milligram of taurine per kilogram of body weight 3 times per day, could that then translate to a 100-kilo male like myself, sort of thing?
It's an interesting question. Personally, I feel the answer is no. However, I will be honest and say I think there are people that will disagree with me, and it's perfectly okay to have that discussion. I'll tell you why I think no. When we take in either a single amino acid or a complete protein, such as steak or chicken or something like that, the process they go through is the same. The process they go through is going into our digestive tract and eventually ending up as single amino acids, even if they start that way. And then what happens is the body decides what to do with those. So let's say, for instance, we know that a particular amino acid, let's take cysteine as an example. N-acetylcysteine is one that's commonly found in this space. But cysteine has multiple uses, in fact, just like every amino acid. But one of the uses of cysteine is to go into hair. And in fact, the disulfide bonds between the sulfhydryl groups, the ionized and cysteine, are what make hair curly. That's why we have that. Now, you have no conscious control over which road cysteine takes once it's in your body. These subconscious or non-conscious decisions are based purely on the signals that your body is getting epigenetically. So if it determines this individual piece of cysteine that I'm holding now is required in this pathway, as opposed to going into this person's hair, it will go into that pathway. And so taking an individual amino acid does nothing but make sure there is no deficiency of that individual amino acid. It doesn't necessarily mean that it will go into the pathway of your conscious choice. And so that's why I believe in a rounded whole food diet, species appropriate. And when you get all the amino acids together and you realize, or not when you realize, but when you have a lack of deficiency across the board, all the pathways are going to, all the pathway boxes are going to be ticked in as well and also a nature intended way as possible. So I don't think there's necessarily any harm in taking an individual amino acid in appropriate doses, but I think there's more benefit from making sure you have a generally all amino acid containing diet, which of course I think is not really going to be ticked in a vegan diet unless you really go out of your way to do something extra. But I think if you're having a piece of steak or if you're a baby having breast milk, that's automatic. And I think that's the best way to go. If you need an individual amino acid, then that is something, again, as the word suggests, individual to you as well, that you would need to speak to someone about to really try and diagnose whether that is the case or not. And I would suggest, but not dictate, that if you have a sufficient amount of high quality protein, such as say beef, lamb, etc., I doubt most people in that situation are going to have a deficiency of a particular single amino acid. That's the way I feel. But again, I think there are people out there who would disagree as well.
Yeah, that's a very fair, rational, and logical, balanced take. I think. I mean, I can't really argue with that. Yeah, I think the problem you have there is that you will have communities of people that have tried something. So I could type in beef burger diet. There'll be a beef burger diet 7-day lose 20 pounds.com website. Like anything, there'll be some sort of cult, some sort of niche target audience, I guess. Now in the bodybuilding community, which it kind of links a bit to autism in a way, I'm trying to say that they'll be using injectable carnitine now as like a fat loss lipotrophic agent sort of thing, lipolytic. So using that maybe before cardio or a few times a day. They're also doing that when they've got a substantially high protein diet. And my question is, someone that is, physically active, has a high protein diet, they're filling in all those gaps, but their opinion, their experience, their anecdote is that I've noticed better fat loss by adding this in, or whether it be for mental health, or it be for autism with taurine, things like that. What would you say to the person that's had an anecdotal benefit, yet seemingly the protein intake is through the roof?
It's good, very good point. And I think in that particular, let's take that as an example. Someone who is on a process of fat loss. So let's define this hypothetical person as storing a super physiological level of fat. So they do need to lose some. In that particular process, in order for the fat to go from here to urine or breath, heat, etc., i.e. completely metabolized, there are steps in between. And when there is a lot of fat being broken down, and it needs to go from intact fatty acid or triacylglyceride to waste products, the rate there now becomes a rate limiting step, which is a technical term in studying biochemistry. if that rate limiting step is all the processes in between. For example, CPT1, carnitine palmitoyl transferase 1. And what happens is, in that situation, the fatty acid or triacylglyceride, the source, layman's terms, that is what's called a zero order reaction. Or this is the reaction is zero order with respect to the fatty acids. What that means is, if you were to increase the level of that, it doesn't increase the rate of output, because we have that rate limiting step or steps in between. And so in that individual situation, having more carnitine, for example, in the step of carnitine palmitoyl transferase 1, can therefore increase the rate of output, i.e. the reaction kinetics, because it is alleviating itself as the rate limiting step. So the limit on the rate limiting step is now higher, therefore there is now an increase in output. And so in that individual situation, when you study the kinetics of those biochemical reactions, that's why we have an N equals 1, most likely true, anecdotal story, because of that individual situation where the amino acid they're supplementing has been turned into a rate limiting step based on what they are trying to do. For the average person who is not trying to do fat loss, because there is no rate limiting step, because there's not a massive amount of fat trying to be metabolized, there is no need for extra amount of that, and they probably won't notice that difference. So if you put yourself in a situation where an individual amino acid becomes relatively deficient, i.e. becomes a rate limiting step, i.e. becomes a first or second order part of the reaction, then increasing it temporarily for that purpose in that situation can give exactly the benefit that you've just said. So those stories, I think, are true, but they have to be taken in the individual context that they're seen in. Apologies for the technical terms for any viewers, but I'm sure you can look it up if you need.
Yeah, thanks. That's well explained. I mean, I only got a pass in my degree for biochemistry, so if I
You did
understood it, I'm
biochemistry?
sure.
No way.
I did human nutrition as my degree.
Fantastic.
I got a 2-1, I think.
Nice.
But yeah, I went into areas of biochemistry. I was well interested in it, but I dropped a lot of it. And
Okay.
Richard does all that stuff now. I don't. It's not for me.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I absolutely love it. In fact,
Introducing Beef Up Carnivore Bodybuilding Bible. The ultimate guide for men and women to lose fat and build muscle. And the best part, it's only $12. Don't miss out on the most detailed resource available. Get a copy now at compositionconsultant.com.
if your viewers are interested, if you're interested, I'm doing a biochemistry course and it'll be free. It'll be on my YouTube. I don't want your email or your phone number or anything. Just click it. You go through it.
Yeah, I like that sort of thing. That'd be a good course to look at. And what I like about biochemistry is it does answer a lot of questions in nutrition that we would otherwise never know. So
Exactly.
I can only get
It's
behind it.
it doesn't require opinion. If you see a blood glucose level rise and you see insulin come and it goes down, you know for sure that's cause and effect. And that's why I think it's so fantastic to study for nutrition, as I'm sure you'd agree.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Wanted to keep it in line with the topic of this talk, which is mostly autism. So how would you go about your day if you're an autistic person? So we'll say someone came to you, a patient. Hi, my name's Joe Bloggs. I'm 20 years old, male. They're always male. Let's make it a female for a change. To say
Okay.
Joanne Bloggs, female, 20 years old, diagnosed with autism 5 years ago.
Okay.
I've been following the carnivore diet. I've been doing, beef, butter, bacon, and eggs. I think that's a popular one. And I've been doing that for 3 months. I feel quite good, but my mood's still not lifted. I'm still quite fatigued. What do you then say to that person? Like, what is your first port of call, and maybe branch out from there?
Sure. So what I typically do, and this is speaking generally, obviously it will be based on the individual, but when a patient comes to see me and they really want personal management of things like this, before the first time I see them, they will be sent a list of what I need, so that when we speak for the first time, I'm not just saying, what's this, and fact finding. I can get that done before. So I want a full diet history, ideally for about 3 weeks afterwards, if not, at least 2. And I want pictures of those foods as well, so I can see the size of the portions and things like that. And I want them to list any symptoms. Do they actually feel full? Are they still hungry afterwards, etc., etc.? And then I want a history of their lifestyle. So, for example, roughly speaking, how much sleep they're getting, when they're inside, when they're outside, what kind of exercise are they doing, what medications, the dose, the timing, etc., what supplements, all those things. That allows me to build a rough picture of who it is that I'm going to see before I've actually seen them. And then I can say, well, you're a little bit deficient here, a little bit deficient here. Let's start with that, optimize everything, and then go from there and address individual symptoms if they're still not fixed based on that. As an example, let's say they do no exercise, and their body weight for their height is relatively low and they're pretty skinny looking. I would say, okay, regardless of whether you're autistic or have this problem or that problem or no problem, it's pretty universal that muscle mass is required for optimum physiological function. So let's tick that box anyway, and then reassess the autism aspect. So we would do a job of box ticking things that are universal and then come back to the autism. Let's pretend we've ticked all those boxes to do all that stuff. And the autism is slightly improved, but still not completely disappeared. The first thing I would say is, well, it's not something that will disappear straight away. We know that, for example, diabetes can take 20 years to develop, I believe 1974. And all these chronic diseases are called chronic for a reason. They take a long time to develop. Most likely, they will take a long time to go away, because taking place over a long time means the damage is probably quite high. You can't instantaneously reverse damage when it's chronic. And so the repair has to be chronic as well. If they've had an improvement, I would say, okay, let's carry on. Little bit by little bit by little bit is absolutely perfectly acceptable, as opposed to expecting an instantaneous reversal. Now, if they have the budget, we might look at other things that might help in that repair aspect. And again, this is individual. I don't think this is a default thing for anyone to do. But for what it's worth, for your viewers' information, here's a couple of things that I might do. NAD plus is something that I use quite a lot. Very specifically, it's not that everyone can just go in and shoot themselves up with it. There is a safe way and an unsafe way to use it. But that is something that has shown huge promise in neurodegenerative disorders, in metabolic disorders, et cetera, especially in combination. In my personal view, it has to be in combination, in fact, with the correct diet and lifestyle boxes ticked. So NAD plus is one that I would look at, and we can chat about that if you like. And that's the main one. Potentially, I would also look at things like glutathione. Now, one of the reasons we mentioned NAC earlier, N-acetylcysteine. One of the reasons people take N-acetylcysteine is to increase glutathione production, because glutathione is a tripeptide: glycine, cysteine, and glutamic acid, I think, unless someone corrects me in the comments. But the cysteine is part of that backbone of that tripeptide. So if you take the cysteine, a certain amount of cysteine leads to a certain amount of glutathione, whatever that may be in ratio for that individual. I'm not going to try and work it out because it's impossible, but it's a certain amount. However, a certain amount of cysteine will lead to less than that of glutathione for obvious reasons. You can have a certain level of inefficiency, not a multiplication. What I prefer to do is actually take the pre-made glutathione in a pure form, not in a pill, in injectable form, and we will actually use that, and we will inject it exactly like a type 1 diabetic inject insulin. In fact, if you saw someone doing it, there'll be no difference visually between someone injecting glutathione and insulin. Syringe is the same part of the body, same layer within the skin, just not within the skin, but underneath the skin, etc. They're two ones that we commonly use, and I personally have seen really good results with it, not just in things like this, but other neurodegenerative conditions like Parkinson's, dementia, mentioned Alzheimer's already, and it's really promising. As a matter of safety for the viewers, please don't think that I'm saying go out and buy these things and do it. The emphasis is on the fact that there is a safe way and there is an unsafe way, and the best way is to see someone that knows what they're doing, and then learn from them what is best for you individually.
That's interesting. You brought those two up because I've used both of those recently. I found that the NAD plus was effective. You do find an energy boost from it, but it was almost as if I just got fed up with jabbing it. It was a bit of it stung a little bit.
Yeah,
a little bit of a sting. And when I say a sting, guys, it's not like agonizing. It's just if you inject yourself with different things, you don't want to be doing it all the time because it just hurts. But so I had one question about that, and a secondary question. So one was, can you just microdose it, or is it better to use as a large kind of, a bolus drip sort of thing. So that's my first question, if you want to answer that one.
That's a very, very important question to ask, because that's one of the differentiators between safe and unsafe use. If you look at what's available on the market, just for a second, and we'll come back to the question, you've got pill form, and then you've got needle form, shall we say. Pill form is self-explanatory. Needle form, you've got exactly what you just said, Jonathan. You've got the microdose, where you inject a little bit into your fat, like every day, every other day, whatever the protocol is for you. And then you've got an IV form, where the needle sits in your arm for about 6 hours, 8 hours, something along those lines. Anyone watching this, please listen very carefully as a matter of your own clinical safety. The average person should never go and get an IV drip of NAD+. It can be extremely dangerous. If you are severely depleted of, let's say, water, you can drink a lot of water and be safe. If you're not that dehydrated, you only need a little sip. Very simple to understand, but the principle is identical for NAD+. Now, you don't feel a thirst for NAD+, which is what makes it difficult to know how much you individually need. And again, that's why you should see someone. But as an average, as a generalization, NAD+ IVs started in the 90s in Tijuana in Mexico. And a really great man, John Gillen, was there at the time. And John saw that this was being done for people with alcohol-induced liver toxicity, i.e. people whose livers had basically said, I'm done. They were on their deathbed. They were given IVs of NAD, in fact, multiple IVs of NAD, and in 5 days, they were just walking around, jumping like nothing had ever happened. Because there's one thing that depletes NAD in the body, it's alcohol, as John always says. So in that situation, because they were so depleted, they needed a huge jug to fill it back up. Now, if you are not in that situation, let's say you're only slightly below the rim on your bucket of NAD, but you pour a bucket full in there and you get the spillage on the side, then you're in trouble, because NAD does not exist as purely NAD in isolation. It is a reversible reaction between NAD plus and NADH. And there lies, in biochemical terms, if you remember, Jonathan, a little bit of something called an equilibrium constant. Based on what the equilibrium constant is, it is more to this side or more to that side. And again, that might even be temperature dependent, depending on what context you're studying it on. But you have that ratio. The ratio is meant to be, just for argument's sake, I'm going to do it on camera here as my two hands next to each other. That's ideal. If NAD plus drops and you give the exact amount to get back to normal, good job. Let's say it drops a little bit, but you go way up here, you're better off because you're still out of balance. You've just got one problem for another, and you're going to get symptoms relative to that. Then you come on to the microdosing, which is what you've mentioned before. The microdosing is where you take a very small amount, small meaning relative to what is available in an IV. And you take that in an individual way that might be, as an example, something like anywhere from 20 to 50 milligrams, something like every other day, potentially every day, depending on the context that you are in. Now, 20 to 50 is a big range, and every other day to every day is a big difference. In the same month, you're talking twice the bottom end of the range. That's why it's very individual. And so those things are both, I would say, the best options because of the pure availability of NAD+, as opposed to a precursor like NMN. However, it's not a choice between an IV or a microdose. It's a dictation. If you have a severe deficiency, for example, you're dying in hospital because your liver's dead or close to dead, your dictated choice is the IV. If you're not in that situation or similar, then the microdose is your only choice, and that's the way to go. The difficulty with using a precursor, such as NMN, is that triggers the production of NAD+, which means it triggers the use of nucleotides like adenosine, so adenine. Now, when you have that, that means that nucleotide is now no longer able to be used in the DNA because it's going into the NAD instead, which is what you're forcing it to do. If that particular use of a nucleotide was best for going into NAD, your body would do it automatically. Otherwise, it would put it into things like DNA or go into something else. The fact that you are trying to dictate to the body what to do with that nucleotide, i.e. put it into the production of NAD+, that automatically, I think for both of us here, tells us that it's clearly not ideal. Just like if your body needs to go into ketosis, it will do it. You don't have to force it. It will just do it if it's best for you. So the very concept of precursors, I disagree with, because you trying to dictate where biochemical processes go in your body, I think is an inherently dangerous precedent to set. Whereas if you give NAD+ on its own, the body still has those nucleotides available to do with it what it would like to do in the first place. And so microdosing, my suggestion is the best way to go. I have tried all of the things I've mentioned here today over 3-4 years-ish. And I believe I am now the biggest user of NAD+ in the UK. Not all for me, obviously, but with all my patients.
You've got like 10 barrels a day. Yeah.
Exactly. But with all my patients and professional footballers I work with and things like that. So, and I know that's a long-winded answer. I apologize. However, there is that safety aspect, which is really crucial for anyone looking to get into this.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, a lot of people just talk about the dosages, but they don't say, okay, for what span of time, how frequent is it? You know, this is like critical. So obviously, I did my reading when I started it, and I was like, okay, based on milligrams per kilogram body weight, let's try 50 milligrams 3 times a week. So kind of like what you said, the high end of what you said.
Yeah.
Geez, the first few times I did it, I felt my whole body rush.
Yeah.
Obviously, I jitzed it too quickly. I probably got some weird response. I should have done it over a few minutes rather than like 10 seconds or something.
Possibly not, actually. Possibly not. I think you injected it normally. I think you did it the right way. It's the dose that's the issue, because there's nothing wrong with injecting this stuff over the course of 5 seconds in your insulin syringe. It's the dose. So, for example, one of the crucial factors for NAD+ to actually get into a cell is the charge on the nitrogen towards the top of the molecule. Well, depends which way you draw it, I guess, but roughly speaking. But when you have a charge like this in the bloodstream, what happens is it can actually attract the negative end of oxygen. The negative, I don't know how much of the biochemistry you remember, but the permanent dipole in oxygen, the electronegativity of the oxygen in water, that will be attracted to that. And depending on the strength of the ionic charge of nitrogen, it will create a certain number of solvation shells around that. Just like sodium, that's why too much sodium is in the body, in the blood vessels, can increase blood pressure. And so when you're feeling that rush, Jonathan, I believe one of the factors that may be playing a role in that is the dose causing this solvation shell effect. And that's what's happening there. Again, which is why dose is really key. So my advice to you individually wouldn't be necessarily to inject slower, because when you put it into the subcutaneous fat, it's a slower release than intramuscular anyway. And so when you put it into the subcutaneous fat, if you're still getting that, it's just a dose. So I actually would suggest for you to halve that dose and actually taper upwards. And if you get to the point where you've done half, you feel great, and you want to try a little bit more, and then you go from, say, 25 milligrams up to 40, and then you get the same symptoms, that's your limit. That's where you're going from the NAD+ ratio being here to here, and you're pushing it to go the other way.
That's well explained. Yeah, thank you. I never even considered that. I mean, I tried diluting it with injectable glutathione as well. It was the same thing. It seems to be the dose. I didn't think to, reverse engineer that one. That makes perfect sense. I want to also mention, when I did the 50 milligram dose, that rush feeling, it gave me more pain.
Yeah.
Not for long, but for a few minutes after it, I felt like my bones were like inflating.
Yeah.
I mean, does that sound familiar at all?
Yeah, dose problem. It's not uncommon at all. You also get headaches, migraines, pains in joints, as well as soft tissue. You get massive inflammation in some places. You get chronic fatigue symptoms occasionally. This is all a dose issue. And this is why, let's say I'm just going to pick random numbers. Let's say your ideal dose is 30 milligrams. That could be great for you, but it could put me into those symptoms, which is why there is no universal dose. If you want to be universal and you want to pick a number, then it would have to be extremely low. So low that some people would get absolutely zero benefit from it. And this is why it is so individual, because it all depends on the diet, really. The job of NAD+ is to go from here, the food we put in our mouth, to here, which is ATP production. NAD is one of the steps in between those simple concepts and ideas. So it stands to reason what you do here affects everything downstream, i.e. what you put in your mouth is, in my view, the biggest determining factor in your NAD plus to NADH ratio and any problems with that ratio. And because that is so different for every single patient, the amount you dose with is exactly the same. It is so individual and so variable. And once you are in a carnivore diet, I suspect, and it's impossible to do a study on this for obvious reasons, but I suspect there will come a time when the optimal dose for NAD plus is actually 0. Because everything here is no longer causing you any inflammation or problems. It's not clogging up your NAD plus to NADH ratio. It's actually perfect, in which case you've got nothing to worry about. And so I believe, and again, it is just a belief, I'm not saying this is the case. I believe once someone has been carnivore for long enough, there is at most very limited use for that individual when it comes to NAD plus, assuming they have no symptoms, no medical conditions, no problems when they're perfectly healthy, etc., etc. If you're in the case of neurodegeneration, that's a different case. I'm talking about the general population with nothing wrong whatsoever.
Interesting. Yeah, that kind of matches my experience. Years ago, I was told, "Oh, you've got the MTHFR gene. I've done all these genetic tests and things, everything you can imagine." Okay, they say supplement with methylfolate. Okay, did that for a week. It worked, but then I crashed so hard. So that kind of matches what you're saying there. You throw something else off balance, something else downstream will kick off. So, what do you think happened there? So I've had this low blood folate level forever. I've got it up probably, I don't know, with the supplement that time, crashed immediately within like a week or two. So what's happened there, do you think? And how might I correct my issue, so to speak?
So I suspect what's happened, obviously I'll never know for certain, but I suspect is the thing you've given yourself, it gave you a benefit. And I'm going to make an analogy to what we just spoke about in NAD+, just so people understand both at the same time. So the NAD plus ratio is like this, and you give yourself some, so it goes great. Your folate was like this, so you gave you some, so you feel great. When you give too much NAD plus and it goes like this, you get the stuff that you've already described in this chat. When you go like that with folate, again, you get the symptoms of too much folate. And so what I suspect is happening is you've just gone beyond that golden window, or the technical term, the homeostatic window for optimum physiological function. And so that's why supervision is required. It's not some money-making opportunity for doctors. Like it's a safety thing.
That makes sense. Can we talk a little bit about injectable glutathione? And it's funny you've mentioned these two things, because they are the two things I probably wanted to talk about anyway.
Cool.
So I found a tremendous benefit, and it sounds like I'm trying to sell something, but I've been using, I think it's two or 300 milligrams of injectable glutathione plus vitamin C, 3 times per week for about 4 or 5 months. Since I've been doing that, my EGFR has gone from about 54 to I think 92, and all my other blood markers have significantly improved. So liver enzymes, inflammation, all these things, like as good as they can be, so to speak. So
sure.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think about that in terms of the dosing, the frequency? Is there anything you can do alongside that to improve its efficacy, or is that just NAD plus and glutathione are two solid choices, sort of thing?
I'll answer the last bit first. So yes, they're solid choices. They're brilliant. And the reason I'm saying that is because they're not foreign to our body. They are what is designed to be in the body already. You look at random antioxidants that people come up with. Where do you find it in human physiology? You probably won't. There may be some benefit, but it's not in our human physiology. And that's why I personally prefer glutathione as the antioxidant of choice if needed. I don't believe there's a food requirement of antioxidants, but if you're going to use it therapeutically under medical supervision for a specific purpose for that individual, that's the one I'd go for. Now, in terms of if people don't know, it is basically reducing oxidative damage, which is going to be there if you have disease in general. I don't want to be too technical here. Now, in terms of how to go about using it, it is possible to use an IV. It is possible to use an IV push as well. And it is possible to microdose at home. Most people, I would not advise going for an IV or a push, because number one, there is no need for that vast quantity in one go. And again, there are issues with people that just jump to an IV to answer every question. However, if you microdose at home, and I think injection is the best way, because again, if you take it in a pill, how much of that actually is glutathione by the time it gets broken down in the stomach acid and the intestine? So if you bypass that and you microdose with an injection straight into the belly fat, like a type 1 diabetic injecting insulin, then you get, if you inject 50 milligrams, you got 50 milligrams. So it's much, much better that way. But there is also an issue of doing possibly too much. It's not common to see that. But I would possibly argue, Jonathan, your individual dosing of a couple 100 milligrams a couple times a week, that may be too much for most people. For you individually, if you're getting benefit and you're seeing positive changes, you should forget what I'm saying, because that's more important. What's actually happening inside you. And that's, to me, is suggestive that there's a lot of oxidative damage that is needing to be repaired. And so it's appropriate for you. However, as a matter of your safety, I would say to you, as long as you are feeling better and getting improvements, carry on. If you feel the amount you use versus the benefit you feel, if you feel that ratio is now dropping, it's suggestive that your bucket is now nearing its brim. And then you slowly taper down and go based on your symptoms. And this is what I call symptom tapering, or symptom dictated dose tapering. Most people who do not have, and I know you've had some surgeries in the past, you've got some back issues, so you would not represent the vast majority of the population. If we talk about the average person without having things like that in their past, and actually no symptoms, no complications, no problems, first of all, do you need glutathione? Okay. But second of all, if you do need it for some reason, whatever that may be, I would typically start with something along the lines of 40 to 50 milligrams per dose, and that dose something along the lines of 3 to 4 times per week. And then I would simply ask the patient, how do you feel? What's going on? Talk to me about your symptoms. And then we change the dosing protocol, or don't change, based on what they do as a result of that. When you restrict that dose to much, much lower, you're restricting the possibility of negative outcomes and negative side effects. And typically that doesn't happen because the patients I go down this road with have some level of oxidative damage already, like in your case. And so we don't have the negative outcomes. We just see how much improvement they get. And then once they're fine, we taper down. At that point, their diet and lifestyle has been corrected anyway. So they're not exactly going to have any more oxidative stress if they can help it, because of the diet and lifestyle being corrected as well.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that's very well explained. It seems to be the same sort of approach that I'd use with, writing a diet plan for someone. Like, okay, where do we start? Where do we need to go? What small change do we need to introduce to get a certain effect? It's exactly the same thing, but you're just looking at symptoms rather than a picture or a scale weight or something. Yes, it's good. Take.
And I would say to patients, if you're seeing someone that is offering you this, either NAD plus or glutathione, and they just say this many milligrams, this many times a week, and that's it, my personal advice would be to walk away. It is not that simple. If they do not ask you, what are you eating? What are you doing in your life? Are you either not trying to find out about your diet and lifestyle, and they just give you a dose like that? I personally believe they're doing you a disservice, not necessarily on purpose, but because they haven't been educated on it. And I understand why they haven't, because this is not taught in medical school. It's not in universities. I've been through the system. It's not there anywhere. Even established doctors who have been around for decades and decades, that are twice my age, are in the audience when I'm teaching this. And it's new for them. And it's difficult for them to understand. So you need to go to someone who does have experience. If you're in London, I'm available, but there will be people all around to do this.
Interesting. If you've got any more time, I'd like to discuss a little bit about kind of a little bit about performance enhancing drugs, but more so in like the peptides realm.
Sure.
So we're looking at like body composition stuff. So things like mitochondrial inhibitors, I think they're called. Mitochondrial support, so MOTS-C, things like that. SLUPP332, you may have heard of. We can go into maybe SARMs as well. So, or cardarine. Cardarine, something I've used with good effect. So I was wondering what you sort of understood about those, and do you use those in practice for anyone that's like an athlete someone exercises, for example, what do you find effective, or is there a problem with each of these as well? Of course.
My problem with those peptides is we don't have long-term studies. And if we take, I think one of the ones you mentioned was BPC 157. If someone is going to use that, I typically say don't go for longer than a month, personally. Human trials are scarce. It's very difficult to know what's going to happen to them afterwards. That's if they insist on doing it, and I don't insist they do it. Personally, my go-to support agents or improvement agents are the NAD plus and the glutathione, and there is something else as a nutraceutical. I rarely mention it because I'm not interested in selling it, but for the purpose of this conversation, I will mention it because that's what the topic is. We look at something called Amino like amino acid -THER. This is it's not a peptide, but it's a collection of amino acids, but individual amino acids. I say not with the peptide bond to make them a protein or a peptide. Studies have been done on this particular product to show, around 2021, if you want the reference, to show that this is so powerful in mitochondrial function. It made cancer cells destroy themselves in the model, while the host cells became stronger. Same product did both at the same time, selectively. And this is because, what do mitochondria respond to? It's not peptides, it's amino acids. They have nutrient sensing pathways. The sensing pathways for fatty acids and glucose are based mainly on glycolysis and beta oxidation to break them down. The sensing pathways for amino acids are very different. We can use amino acids to use as metabolic fuel. However, their main job is to create protein, which is structure and everything around us. We're depending on what paper you read, 17 to 18% protein. So the mitochondria senses these things and then determines what happens with the metabolic fuel, which is the glucose and fatty acids. Now, I'm skipping a lot here for anyone who's deeply into this, but I'm doing that because I don't want to go on for 6 hours. But the mitochondria will sense those based on the amino acids. And this is how this product works, this particular nutraceutical. When it does that, then it creates what we want it to create. And there are versions of this product used in mitochondria in different parts of the body, which I won't go into. That's a talk for another day. But there is a sports version of this nutraceutical that I take as well. And the Amino there was a study done where they went to a hospital. I think it was in Italy. I can't remember. But it was patients in hospital. So already they're sick. Already they're difficult to treat. Second of all, it was geriatric. So they're not just sick, but they're the hardest population to treat because they've generally got polypharmacy, many different drugs, weaker immune system, blah, blah, blah. No change in clinical treatment. Just gave them a couple sachets of this a day. The infection rate dropped by 1/3 because of what it is doing. And so for me, those peptides, I've never seen a peptide, such as the ones you mentioned, with data as strong as this and as beneficial in natural human physiology as this. Because we don't know fully what all those peptides do in the long term. We can have a guess, and we can obviously we can look at anecdotal studies, and they're fine in context. But these are just individual amino acids, so we know that there is no risk and there is no harm, and that's why I prefer something like this. So Amino is indicated for things like sarcopenia. The sports version is called Big One Pro. Terrible name in my opinion. But that's, I have that, and that's what I take. And I do know professional footballers that take it as well. It's a bit of an open secret, but I know it's heavily linked to teams like Inter Milan, the Italian national team, and others, which unfortunately I'm under NDAs to disclose. But those ones I can say because I think that has been mentioned in the public before.
Well, fair enough. Yeah, you'll have to hook me up and see what this is about.
Yeah,
I'm quite good at testing things because you can imagine, because I do the same thing every day.
Yeah,
Adding one thing, it's like, okay, yeah, that didn't. No, that didn't. But I'm gonna have another look at the NAD stuff. I think I just got the dose completely wrong.
where did you, just out of interest, and this might be interesting for the viewers, where did you source your
I
NAD
got it
from?
on I got it on Amazon, funnily enough, of all places. I believe there's 2 sites that do it. They're in the UK. I don't know. It gave me the side effects when I used it at that dose, which matched what I read online. So I was like,
Sure.
it probably is similar. I doubt they spiked it with something which makes people
Yeah.
feel like that.
So there's an issue with the manufacturer of this product, and that's stability. Now it's not a difficult problem to get around. It's fine. But what happens is you get something called overage during manufacturing of NAD+. Overage is where something's going to be lost because it's going to be sat, in transport, whatever, for a while, and you'll lose some. So what you do is you overage it, and you don't give, let's say it's 100 milligrams of NAD in that vial. Instead of giving them 100, you might give 110, 20, 30, whatever, knowing that you'll lose some to instability and then it'll drop to 100. Depending on the manufacturing process, the production time frame, etc., your overage could potentially be responsible. So it could be that the dose is right theoretically, but the dose you're injecting isn't what you think you're doing because of manufacturing overage. And this is something that people don't realize, and this is why you have to look at something called a COA, certificate of analysis, I think. And different companies either won't even have one, or they will happily, openly, transparently give it to you. For that reason, because I know this, I personally, and this is, I'm not paid to mention this, so I want to make it very, very clear, but to save comments asking where do you get yours from, I get mine from a website called nadplusathome.com, but plus the word, not the mathematical symbol. I have no affiliate link. However, I do have a discount code I give to my patients. It doesn't make me any money. It's just to help them out. And it's ABS25, which any of you are welcome to use. Now, why do I use that? Because I know the overage is within a certain distance from what is meant to be pharmaceutically, so that the COA, the certificate of analysis, is bang on, and you're not getting too little and you're not getting dangerously too much as well. And so I've had the most success with that than all other brands. As well as that particular brand in the same website is where I get my glutathione from. So it saves me money because I can get a pack for my patients where they put both in together. Of all the brands I've used over the last 4 years, something like that, that is for me, that comes out above all, because I've had the chance to speak to the manufacturer where they get it from. They kindly put me in touch because I was buying so much, and ever since I've never got from anywhere else.
Interesting. Yeah, you mentioned such good points there about the safety element of it, and I know for sure. I mean, when I've looked at different supplements and said, "Oh, can you send me this?" They'll send it to you, but they're sending you a COA of it when it was in a tin in the middle of China in some street. It's like, well, no, I don't want to know what's in the tin. That you sort of say 25 kilogram aluminium drum, whatever.
Yeah.
You think, okay, in the drum it was that. What is it in this little vial here? What is it in there?
Exactly.
So
and that is
so
the problem.
limited. Yeah.
Even in simple things like omega-3s, you have the same issue. The omega-3s, when they're produced at the factory, they might be 100% pure. They go through a process of peroxidation by the time they get to you. If you look at Janssen K 2016, they looked at omega-3s commercially available. I was walking into a drugstore, I think it was Boots, actually, if you know what that is in the UK, and a few other places, and they just tested them, took them out, okay, what's in it? And they were just rancid. And so that's why a COA even has to be taken into context. It's not just about what it says in the COA. What is the actual production process? How is it actually done? What are the overages? How long from production to being in my body, etc.? These are questions, unfortunately, which most people don't know to ask because they're not in this space. Now, I know because I've been in it long enough, but it's also something which there's no set standard. You can pass your COA and you can get it as safe to sell. You can get a CE mark. But the CE mark and things like that don't look at the time to usage of the end consumer, which is why rancid omega-3s are legal to sell. And so with knowing all that, that's why I personally use the brand that I do. I do recommend them, but again, I have no financial gain or connection to them whatsoever.
It makes perfect sense. Yeah, I mean, I was a manager for a health food store in the UK, basically, and we always get like these reps come in, like, oh, we have this product, and I'd always ask to see this like routine list of things. They had to make sure with my team assistants, like, don't sort of order anything in unless you've sort of run it past me first and I've seen it, I've checked it off my list, because otherwise we're putting stuff out it's just crap. It doesn't do great stuff for your reputation if you put out products which down the line, it's got if it's meant to be ethical and it's like tested on animals, whatever it is, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm rambling here, but yeah, the products were not that well made, or even the labels. It's so hard to determine what's going on.
Yeah.
And it's the same with like food law as well. When we look at a food label, especially of imports, there's a lot of things which shouldn't be sold in supermarkets, and they can't be sold in supermarkets.
Yeah.
It's like, for example, if you've got a Freddo chocolate bar, they're like little chocolate frog things in the UK, and they're like 10-15p, okay, that big. But if it's over a certain size, it has to have a nutrition label on it. But it has to be, if it's like a flat thing, or if it's round. For example, cream egg doesn't have to have a label on it. But if a cream egg was made the same but in a bar form, you know, in terms of weight, flat, then yeah, it would have to have a face of a label on it. So
wow, I didn't know
it's
that.
so bizarre. Yeah, food law is very bizarre, and honestly, I wish I never found it out, because a lot of stuff annoys you. I'm sure you'll find in your sort of industry of like the cosmetics and, you know.
Exactly. I mean, supplements are the same, including injectable supplements like glutathione and NAD+. And my advice to consumers watching this is, I'm sorry to say this, but as a general consumer, you have no ability to say which is the best one. And I know that might be controversial, but I have my reasons, and including the reasons I've said today. You have no idea, even if someone tells you the production process, unless you're an expert in biochemical production of things, how are you going to be able to even determine whether that production process is appropriate or not for that supplement? You don't. This is why a general consumer has absolutely no idea, even with the right certificates, because there are ways around certificates. And this is why I try and demonstrate my knowledge and my experience, and then at least use that as an area of credibility for the brands that I personally do use and recommend, because then it's my reputation on the line. And if they don't have the knowledge to understand production process, they have the knowledge to understand my reputation is on the line if I'm recommending a particular brand. Obviously, if you disagree, that's fine. You can go with someone else's recommendation, but these are the reasons I recommend these. And don't try and really figure out which one is best, because, like I said, it's going to be impossible for the layman to do it.
A sensible advice. You can get your head spinning and tossing and turning everywhere, just work all these things out. I did a little study on Red Bull, different energy drinks within the UK. This is not a claim, like a legal claim of any sort, but I'll say all of them that we tested about 1/3 less caffeine per 100 milliliters than what it said on the label. So a product will say, you know, typically it's 32 milligrams per 100 milliliters for different energy drinks. They're all about 20, 21 across the board. Then we use a different machine, so we thought, oh, maybe this machine's buggered. No, test the same thing again. We use a sonification machine, which is like a little vibrating wheel plate thing, just to get rid of all the bubbles in case like the carbonation was affecting it somehow. Nope, same effect. So yeah, we did the experiment and we found it was below label claims, which is probably actually a good thing, because people probably drink too much. It's like in toothpaste, the legal limit is 1,500 parts per million of fluoride. So when you look on the back, it will say 1,450. So there's a bit of leeway. And I guess that's the same thing as what you found. That leeway is what you found. For sure, yeah. It's frustrating with food. Greek yogurt. If anyone's watching this, go out to your supermarket, buy a Fire Greek yogurt, anyone. Scoop it all out, put it on the scales. Oh, find out the weight for yourself. You'll be quite shocked. I found it every time with everyone I know. So it wasn't a batch dependent thing. And it's the same with tins of beans. I used to eat beans like 6-7 years ago. Every brand was like under by about 25 grams. So yes, that's why I think just getting a food from a butcher or buying a pack of half kilo of meat or whatever it is, if you're buying a supplement or whatever, just make sure it is what it is, and you can't go too wrong if you eat whole foods. When you start mixing it up with things, you don't know, you know, is it 20% onions in this burger? Is it 10%? They're quite sneaky sometimes. So
always,
yeah, nice one. Well, that's we've got time for today. That's been truly informative. I love the element of health and performance, physical performance and mental performance, you know, with autism, symptomology, things like that, and also, you know, the safe practices and what to look at, because it's all good us coming on here and say this dose does this and I got this benefit, but no one ever talks about the other side of it, what we're looking for.
Yeah, exactly.
And obviously I can link your code that you've used for the NAD at home product below as well. But thank you very much.
Thank you for the email, Jonathan. It's been great. Enjoyed it.
Check out my site at compositionconsultant.com, where your journey to peak performance and optimal health begins. With a degree in human nutrition and over 15 years of training experience, I've guided more than 400 carnivores to not just meet, but exceed their physique and performance goals. Through personalised consultations, comprehensive ebooks and dedicated coaching, I'm here to ensure your success. Join the ranks of those who have transformed their lives. It's time to align your physique goals with positive health outcomes. Visit compositionconsultant.com today and take the first step towards the best version of you.